So please, ladies and gentlemen, Evan, yes, please go ahead.
Gary, I'm just so pleased to hear you talk on that particular subject at the Christopher Dawson colloquium a few years ago. I got very excited when Bishop Porteous talked on the same theme of bringing back beauty, and I accused the Catholic Church of being a world leader in destroying beautiful things and building very ugly things in my lifetime. And it was a little unfair because, but I have to get it off my chest. Do you see a return of like the professional art world and architectural world to beauty, or have we still got some way to go before we get there?
I'll probably answer by saying I'm not qualified to give a definitive answer at all, but I can just perhaps suggest it'll be a mixture. People like Sir Roger Scruton were championing beauty in architecture for decades, and there will be that movement, but there's so much momentum and so much entrenched money and so much entrenched education in architectural ugliness that it's hard to see it turning around. I think these things will take place over decades, if not generations. And also, when we're talking about great artistic beauty, it takes rare talent, and that just happens when it happens. We can't manufacture it at creative writing schools and at arts colleges. It's just when it happens, and if there's one artistic genius emerges in a culture at one time, we give thanks, and if there's a clutch of them, well, hallelujah. It's out of our control. But we can certainly appreciate it and demand it, and expect it and agitate for it. But the creation of it, original new works, that's just going to take talent and genius when it pops up, I think. All we can do is prepare for it better.
Thanks, Gary. Evan. Sophie, please. Thanks, Evan.
Sophie York, thank you to all the panel for their contributions to this amazing conference. My question is this, and I don't mind who wants to take this ball and run with it, is that I see that our society has had many important pillars of it, institutions infiltrated by people who defame our forebears, tarnish our traditions, require us all to kowtow to the new form of socialism and so forth. And I feel when I come to gatherings like this that it's the same lovely people speaking to the same lovely audience. And what's your recommendation for reaching into and reclaiming our very important institutions?
Is this an Australia question or a global question?
It's probably the West.
Well, like I said before, like I said before, we are all here. The Lord puts us here to evangelize, to bring the good news of the gospel to everybody, disciples of all nations. So the trick is how you do it. So there are two things you need to keep in mind. Number one, it's your expectations should be that you lead with love and charity, that you meet people where they're at. It's very important. And that your job is to love, and God's job is to judge. The problem is sometimes we forget that we're not God, and it sort of goes to our head, and we try to be God, and then we say, well, I gotta go in there and convert this person, and that's not it at all. I mean, it's more like God will put people in your path, and it is your job to evangelize them by first leading with charity, with love, to understanding where they're at, in their Christian journey. And sometimes the best thing you can do is smile. Sometimes that's the best thing you can do, the most productive thing. And if you're an evangelist, and we should all be, especially for guys, it's I'm so old that I think men and women are different. But anyway, so I apologize for my sweeping generalization there. But you have to, for men in particular, not that we can't love, we can, but we're more like we want to fix stuff. You know, we're just fixers, and sometimes, and this is where humility comes in, we can't fix certain things. We may want to and desire full conversion of someone that we met, but it may not happen, and maybe God puts this person in front of you so that you chip away and soften the heart a little bit so that the next person can do the same as the next person, and so on and so forth. So just manage your expectations, but don't stay home either. I mean, you have to be out there, and you have to overwhelm people with love, and allow them to see Christ in you. However that can be done.
Yes, isn't it true that what we have to do is if we want more, we have to be better. If we want more, we have to be better.
Well, I view it as a question of Christian leadership. In our schools, we crank out leaders that then go on to society and do the things that, spread the gospel, evangelize, defend the faith, etc. So the best Christian leader is the one that can find the right balance. I'm Argentinian, and I have to use my hands. I'm sorry, I wasn't comfortable there. No, you have to find the right balance between two very important Christian virtues. One is the virtue of magnanimity, meaning exactly what you're saying. We gotta be better, and then once we're better, we gotta be better and better, because if you think of God, if you look at His creation, and it is unbelievable, the greatness that you observe in His creation, then we are the sort of crown jewel of His creation, right? So, I don't think He wants us to be so-so. I think He has incredible expectations. He wants us to be great. Okay, so we got to strive for greatness, and that's what magnanimity is about. But you have to balance that with humility. Humility has a lot of benefits. I'm from Argentina, and we're not famous for being humble, so that's one that I struggle with. But I know I have to do better there, And it's the balance between those two that makes you the best possible Christian leader. And it's all about leadership. It's about, don't expect people to come to you and say, please evangelize me. God will put them in front of you, and then you have to be actively pursuing that. The person who asked the question, we lost her.
I'm just
You're just hiding from me.
Don't forget our points.
So I don't know if that helps, but...
Be loving, be Christ-like. I got it.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
Smile.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
I'll take that.
John, did you want to... No, I was going to offer to take the microphone around.
Oh, thank you, good sir. So, anyway, more questions? Go, Dorothy.
Okay, just a comment from anybody and everybody would be terrific on this particular thought that I've been having. In Australia, maybe in other parts of the world as well, we have a huge institutional history that relates directly to the Catholic Church. Our schools, our hospitals, our social services, and you can just go on and on. And somewhere along the way, the Catholic identity of all of that has been lost. So people go to St Vincent's or to the Mater Hospital or wherever without having any idea of the sacrifices that were made to establish those institutions. And I just wonder how we recapture that or maybe help that emerge through things like the schools, through the Chesterton Society, through everybody in this room and so on.
Through journalists.
Through journalists and books.
Nothing else works.
Just some commentary around that would be great.
So
Thank you.
just a footnote on humility, on which I'm a tremendous expert. Benjamin Franklin said of himself that he could never be humble because he was too smart. But he found that if you faked humility, it was just as good. You know, all the same benefits. You still listen to other people, and so you could get their wisdom, even though you thought they weren't very smart. And people still thought you were a nice, humble guy. So, you know, fake it till you make it has got a great... But look, on the institutions, let me recommend to you a book by Monsignor James Shea called From Christendom to the Apostolic Age, in which he says, you know, we used to live in Christendom, it was very hypocritical Christendom, and the greatest temptation in Christendom is hypocrisy, pretend to be more Christian than you are. We now live in the Apostolic Age where Christianity is not dominant, and the greatest temptation is cowardice. You pretend to be less Christian than you are. But he makes a couple of comments directly on what you're saying. He says the first thing is to remain genuinely Christian in the Apostolic Age. A Christian institution needs tremendous intentionality and leadership. This is very hard for the church in Australia, very, very hard. So there are a lot of Christian schools where the parents a generation ago or 3 generations ago were happy to send their kids to the school because it was a high standard school and it had good values. And the values that it had were the same values as the society valued. Nowadays, a lot of parents want to send their kids to famous Christian schools, historic Christian schools, because they're very good schools, but they actually don't like the values if they're Christian values, because the society's values are no longer Christian values. So this sets up a conflict for the leaders of those schools. Do we alienate our potential customers, these parents, by actually preaching Christian values? Or do we just go quiet on those Christian values or just forget about them altogether? And we're still a good school and it's a bit of a better atmosphere. So there are 2 challenges really. The leaders of notionally Christian institutions need to reassert their Christianity. So that's a big challenge, and you can see good bishops in Australia doing that, but you can't just declare it and it happens overnight. You've got to find the staff, you know, you've got to find the second tier of leadership and all the rest of it. But then the other thing is, what Christians are doing is creating new institutions, and this is very much an echo of the early Christians. So you can spend forever trying to reform the state school system or even trying to reform the Catholic school system, and you'll go mad. Or you can simply build a new institution. Now, that requires your whole life's work, and you'll never get rich, and you'll have to work 28 hours a day and so on. But that's the easier option. And increasingly you're seeing this happen. So, you know, the Chesterton School is a great example of that in America. But, you know, I was just in Brisbane in the John Henry Newman College, this magnificent institution. We're in the Campion College. So, and many of the most dynamic Christian institutions are new institutions, so you've got a great big established Christian church next door that nobody goes to, and you've got a new struggling mendicant order, you know, missionaries of God love or something, haven't got a brass rosette to rub together, but somehow or other the hall is full. And, you know, the final thing is you've got to do all of the above. You've got to do everything all together all at once.
I'd say there's one of the problems with the Catholic Church here and in the States and the Western world, I think, is that we've relied too much on institutional preservation of values. is that values are individual. So if we're going to have good Christian institutions, they have to be staffed and vivified by good Christians. In other words, and for Catholics that means a deep sacramental life, a deep life of prayer and so on. You can't expect to send children to a school taught by good Catholic teachers when they don't have good formation from their parents at home and so on. I think we always have to keep in sight the importance of a personal spiritual life, a personal relationship with God. Otherwise, the institution is going to get hollowed out and is going to fail.
Yes, any more questions there, David? Thanks, Tom.
Thinking of Chesterton's poem, Lepanto, a question to Michael and Greg. Michael, you mentioned you've been focused on demographics a lot in Mercator, and surely the great demographic transition, particularly for Europe, is in the direction of Islam, which was once considered a mortal threat to Christendom. And Greg, even in your book, I know it skipped the Islam era, but 21st century Christians in various countries, Nigeria, Pakistan, elsewhere, are being martyred at rates that the Romans would be proud of. So what should the Christian response be to the Islamisation of old Christendom?
Well, I'll go before Michael because he's wiser than I am, and that's such an easy question. And it doesn't lead me into any controversial area or anything like that. But it may well be that part of the revival in Christianity in Europe is a result of the Islamisation of Europe. Rodney Stark, a very interesting sociologist of religion, who is, I don't think he ever became Catholic, I don't know, but he's very, very pro-Catholic in his historical writings, not being a Catholic himself, certainly at the time, in most of those writings. Now, he maintains a proposition which is theologically unsound, but sociologically correct, which is religion benefits from competition. And one of the good things in Australia, there was a great book on history of religion in Australia. For many years, in every Australian country town, there were four Christian churches: the Catholic, the Anglican, I don't know, the Presbyterian and the Baptist or something. And each minister was a bit aware that the other guy swept up his front lawn a bit better than I did, and I got to kind of show a good face to, and they were all aware that, they were trying to get the attention of the town. They often were good friends. Geoffrey Blaney recalls being the son of a Baptist minister or something, and selling tickets to a Baptist dinner, alone and forlorn as a little kid. And the Catholic parish priest bought 2 of the tickets. He couldn't go to the dinner, but he was just being kind to young Geoffrey. And 90 years later, Geoffrey Blaney recalls that act of kindness. Now, it may be that the confrontation which Islam poses to Christianity in Europe has made people consider the first things again. And just as Christians defined themselves in the early church, both by their positive Christian beliefs, but also by the conflict and competition of the culture around them. Certainly, the issue of Christian martyrdom certainly particularly in Africa, at the hands of Muslims. We've got to be very, very careful here. There are a little short of 2 billion Muslims in the world. Most of them, in fact, are not persecuting Christians. So we have to be very careful about guilt by association. And there's a very complex, deep subject. I recommend the writings of Bernard Lewis. There is a strain within Islam which is very intolerant of other religious traditions. And I think we have to deal with that foursquare where it comes up. At the same time, we can't take an anti-Islam point of view. That's not right. I mean, I have Muslim neighbours in my street who are the loveliest people in the world and never persecuted anybody in the history of the world. And it will be quite wrong to judge them as individuals by the sins and wickedness of some of their co-religionists. But the Islamic challenge to Christianity both the challenge of an alternative credibility structure and the challenge of physical conflict and persecution is very great, and I've spent a lot of time over the years in places like Turkey and Egypt listening to Christian leaders tell me about what happens to them at the hands of their Muslim neighbours and asking me not to write about it because it'll get them into trouble. But it's one of the most difficult issues that we confront, and you know, there it is, I have no solution. Now Michael will give you the solution.
I don't know enough about the details of the demography, but you might think that Muslims have much larger families and so on, but and maybe that's happening in the first generation or the second generation in Europe. I don't believe so, but you correct me about that. But across North Africa, in Iran, and in all the other countries in that part of the world, birth rates are dropping. Iran saw the largest drop in birth rate in recorded history from about 1975 to 2000. It went from about 6 to 1.8. It's unbelievable, right? And they have a gigantic demographic problem in Iran because they have this huge overhang of elderly people, and that's partly why they have so much problem with young unemployment and so on. You know. So that's one thing I'd like to point out, that it's not as though Muslims are going to populate Christians out of existence. I mean, that's a very unfair way of looking at it. But anyway.
And it's a challenge of the West, really, as you touched on, Michael, and that is, you know, we're facing a population implosion, not a population explosion.
And the other thing, so I think one answer to that is simply Christians have to be more Christian and have more children and so on. The other thing I'd like to say is that if Christians feel fearful about Islam, they should do more evangelization, like Kes was saying, with in the subtle way that Kes was talking about, you know, of showing them love and charity and just being good neighbours. The other day, I had to, it's sort of very parish pump stuff, but I went to a parish fete in Lakemba. Now, Lakemba is known for one thing. It's mosque, you know. And in fact, there's a lot of Catholics there. Vietnamese are very strong there as well. Anyway, so mostly Vietnamese people there. And the new parish priest is a Vietnamese fellow whose English is pretty rough, but he's full of the spirit sort of thing. And I met there a fellow from he's from Tunisia. He and his wife send their daughter to the local school, you know. And he said, "Oh, I can't stand maybe he was being unfair, but I can't stand a religion which teaches people to hate each other." You know. Anyway, that was his perspective on things. So I think there's a lot of potential for people being converted, and I've heard from priests and various friends that there are sort of under the surface a number of people coming to the Catholic Church from Islam, but because of the well-known problem of their relatives maybe taking revenge on them for apostasy and so on, that doesn't come out, but it does happen, and it probably happen more if we were better at evangelizing.
Thanks, Michael. We'll have to pause there really because Mass is about to begin at 5 o'clock for those who would like to go to Mass in the chapel. So I just wanted to close the conference by firstly thanking very greatly all of our speakers that have been here with us today and have given so much of their time and their insights. And to offer a number of other thanks to my wife Virginia for all her support and her great work behind the scenes right through the year, but today, of course, in front of the scenes as well. I'm very grateful to Virginia. I do want to thank Michael Mendieta for taking today's conference papers, which he'll kindly edit, and my son Marty, who developed and maintains, as I mentioned earlier, the Australian Chesterton website, where the papers will in time be uploaded. Many thanks to Mark and Gay Smith for the book sale that they have provided. And finally, I would like to thank the staff of Campion College. Many of them helped with the arrangements of this conference. John Gresser has been here today helping with so many organisational and technical matters. The librarian Anusha has been providing all sorts of assistance, including the book sale across the way. We've had a chef, Peter, we thank for morning, afternoon teas and also for lunch and tonight's dinner. And finally, Father Luke Holohan, who's about to celebrate the conference mass, which will take place very shortly in the chapel. So I hope you've received some sense today, ladies and gentlemen, of the everlasting Chesterton. And let me finish by quoting the English novelist Anthony Burgess, who once wrote, "Solid and earthbound as he seemed, Chesterton knew what it was like to live on the level of eternity." Thank you very much.